on Eagle Mountain, and the conference center is called the Bose Conference Center. And so those are very important experiences for me. And maybe some of you have had those too. Maybe not necessarily on top of the mountain, but going to a retreat, the Christ Alive things that were done in this area a while back. Many of you have done Emmaus Road or anything like that. Those retreats, whether they're on a mountaintop or not, become mountaintop experiences for us because something happens in just getting away into that setting and doing things a little differently than we normally do it with a community of people. And usually in that, people have some kind of experience of God. But the mountaintop experience we talk about today is not exactly like that experience. It's similar, but not exactly like that experience. Because this mountaintop experience is very much located in a person, not just a situation, but in a person. It's very much located in the person of Jesus. It is a vision for Jesus, first of all, before he is going to have to go through all the things he's about to go through. And in that vision, he is with Moses, who died a long time before Jesus. Moses, the one who had delivered the people of Israel out of bondage and slavery and through the wilderness on that pilgrim journey to Canaan's land. Though Moses never got there himself, but that's where they were headed. And Elijah, who you heard about in the first reading, who was the prophet that the story goes was taken up in a whirlwind and would be the one to come right when the Messiah was to come, that Elijah would come back first. So it's very symbolic that he would be here with these two great figures of his religion, of Judaism, making an affirmation, like God was making a statement of, it's all right. You are right in line with what you're supposed to do, even though it's going to look a little strange from here on out. And while he's having this experience, his three close friends, Peter, James, and John, have the same vision. They're able to see this vision of Moses and Elijah also. And I'm sure all of those thoughts came to them also of Jesus being in line with Moses and Elijah, in line with all the traditions that they had grown up with. But in that, they saw something else. Because in his own experience, Jesus' face and his whole body became what we call transfigured. And as they gazed at him in this cloudy mist, what they saw was it was like a light was shining from inside of him, like his clothes were white, like a light is white, and his face was shining with the presence of God. What they saw was a vision of God in the face of Jesus. Now, we could leave the story at that, because that's a pretty powerful story, isn't it? To think of that and to have that witness for us. But if we left it there, we would only be leaving with half of the story that God would like for us to hear from there. Because as generations of church history has taught us, God's whole reason for becoming incarnate, becoming enfleshed in Jesus, was not only to show us what God looks like, but was to show us what we human beings are supposed to look like too. That's what it means when in the Creed we say fully human, fully divine. That in Jesus we see the complete image of who God is, but we also see the complete image of who we are supposed to be. And so if we leave it with just the story of seeing the divinity within the shining, we've only gone to half the story. Because the other half of the story is that the transfiguration is not just about Jesus, it's also about us. It's about you and me. It's about the truth that as members of the body of Christ, we are to let our own lives become transfigured by the Spirit and light of Christ, so that same Spirit and light can shine through us to the world. I could not possibly explain to you how this happens. But I can tell you some stories about times when I have seen it happen. And so I'd like to tell you a couple of those today. I think of one back when I was serving at St. Stephen's Episcopal Church in Oak Ridge, Tennessee. There was a man named Jack. I was in my 40s probably at that time, and Jack was, I guess he was probably in his 70s, early 70s maybe. And Jack had lived pretty much a hard life, and I actually am not sure what Jack had done for a living, but whatever he had done, he knew a lot about construction. But Jack was kind of one of those irascible characters, if you know what I mean. He could be a little crude in his speech sometimes, embarrassingly so. He could be a little gruff. He probably drank a lot more beer than he needed to. And some people weren't quite sure how to take Jack. But when Jack retired, somehow the spirit of wanting to help people with the skills he knew transfigured his life into a life of working for Habitat for Humanity. You guys know about Habitat for Humanity? I mean, it's a program where somebody that qualifies with a certain income can get a lesser loan to build their house, but they have to put in what's called sweat equity. In other words, they help build the house. And other people come together and help build the house. So you have a few experts like Jack, and then you have a few of us that don't know what we're doing, and Jack teaching us. Well, it was amazing that this guy that could put so many people off in polite society, when you got him building a house, I watched him like with kids Michael's age, 10 and over, showing them how to drive a nail, or showing some high school kids how to hang drywall, or taking some women that usually didn't do anything like that and showing them how to paint. And I mean, it was amazing what he did. His life was transfigured in those moments. It didn't spread to every area of his life, but in those moments when he was on a Habitat site, you could see the face of God in Jack. Here's another story. This was when I was at Church of the Resurrection in Loudon. And every year around Christmas, we did the paper bag Christmas pageant. We do that, don't we? We do the paper bag Christmas pageant. But they didn't do it like we did it. That's actually where I first was introduced to it, though. The way they did it was on a Sunday night, they invited men and women from what was an assisted living house for mentally challenged folks. And in that house, they lived all together as a community with some people that helped provide some supervision, but they cooked, they did all the things, anything that they could do for themselves, they were encouraged to do. And so every year, the Church of the Resurrection, the whole parish, had a party. And it was during Advent, towards the end of Advent, we would invite the people from this home over. And they would come, and we would cook hamburgers, and we would all eat hamburgers together. There were usually about 15 or 20 of them, and there were usually about 30 to 40 of us that were there. And then after that, we would do the paper bag pageant, where you just take out the things. But instead of just props like we have, they had full costumes that they took out. Well, my first year, I was kind of trying to meet some of the people from the home. I was going around and asking them their names. And this one young woman who I think probably had Down syndrome said, "I'm Mary." And I went on to somebody else, and she came up behind me again, and she said, "I'm Mary." And that kept happening. She kept following me around saying, "I'm Mary." And I kept saying, "It's so nice to meet you, Mary." Well, it got time for the pageant, and she put on Mary's costume, and she was Mary. And apparently she did that every year. Everybody but me knew that she was Mary. So I don't know whether her name was Mary or not, because all I ever found out was she was Mary. But as we did that pageant, and everybody, of course, participated, and there was no audience, everybody was in it. So pretty soon you had, in this great hall that we had, with these wonderful windows and a big stone fireplace, you had everybody up there by the fireplace, and Mary was kneeling by the baby Jesus, and I was kind of over here, and I looked over there, and I swear it was like her face was lit from inside, transfigured by the experience of being Mary. And I saw the face of God in her face. One more. When I was at St. Luke's, that's where I was before you guys stole me away. That was a little inner city, historically African-American parish. One of my predecessors back from the 60s was Father Jones. I'm sure he had a first name, but I only knew Father Jones, because that's what he was known throughout the diocese as, was Father Jones by anybody. He was not in town when I first went to St. Luke's. He had retired. He was up in Detroit. But I'd always, from the time I had begun years back before that in the 70s, I'd always heard about Father Jones, because during the Civil Rights Movement, St. Luke's had been the center of the civil rights movement in Knoxville. And Father Jones had been one of the instrumental people who helped there to be nonviolent protests, who helped to get things done, yet without it breaking into violence. He was credited with that from lots of different places. But he did do things like the nonviolent protests, where he would gather students from the University of Tennessee, and they would do sit-ins and all things like that. I'd seen newspaper pictures and all sorts of things, and even this great big poster of him that just was about that big. And I'd always thought of him as a giant of a man. I'd even heard the stories that in the 60s, the bishop at that time had the special fund just to bail him out of jail when they arrested him at a sit-in. Well, he came back. And I heard that he was coming back. I was so excited to finally meet this giant of a man. And into church one Sunday morning walked this little old black man that was not much taller than I am and very frail and skinny with his daughter on his arm. And he came in, and he stayed in that parish till he died. I did his funeral. And every single Sunday, he would come up to the altar rail and he'd kneel down, and he'd put his hands out. And as I put the wafer in his hands, he would look at me and say, he'd look at me and wink and say, "You're doing a good job." It was the face of God in a giant of a man. This is the way God works with us. God works with us by letting His light come into ours, even when all we leave is just a little bitty crack. And when His light comes into our life, it transfigures our lives. Maybe not in all areas, but at least in the area where we gave a crack. And so on this Transfiguration Sunday, I ask you to pray that you will be open to the light of Christ that is trying to be given, that God is trying to give to you. That you will be open to letting that light shine through your life to others. Because this is a day to remember that we are called to live transfigured lives and not just on a mountaintop. May it be so.